even now I'm trying to consider how I word things. It's not okay what Ofsted does to people. And it's not just me. I've had too many meetings with head teachers who are so stressed, really strong, resilient people who've ended up taking a bit of time off, ended up on medication, who've retired because they don't want to go through it again, who've quit because they haven't got it in them to go through another Ofsted. And these are good people. And a couple of months back, somebody said to me, even the good ones are leaving now. And I just thought, I can't do this. It's not okay. It does need to change.
Welcome to Rethinking Education. Education's critical friend.
Dave McPartlin, welcome to the Rethinking Education podcast.
Hi, James. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for joining me. It's been an eventful few weeks, as you'll be aware, and so usually these conversations are quite long, in-depth, long-form conversations. But this series that I'm doing, initially I put out a tweet and said, do any head teachers, former head teachers, want to come and share their experiences with Ofsted, and we could do it anonymously if people feel nervous about speaking out and so on. And quite a few people responded, and now it seems to be growing. I interviewed some former inspectors recently, and young people are going to get involved, and this thing seems to be growing. As indeed, this debate seems to be showing no signs of abating. So we'll get into all of that. I would really like to spend some time speaking. We probably don't have time today, but I'd love to chat to you sometime about your amazing appearance on Britain's Got Talent a few years ago, where you took the kids on. If anybody hasn't seen this clip, I'll stick a link to it in the show notes. There's something else. I don't know if you just got any brief comments on that.
Oh, it was just, it was one of the most ridiculous moments of my life. I think it will always be that moment. I'm not quite sure how that happened. We're in a community that might be considered to be disadvantaged, high deprivation. I don't like making a sing and dance about it, but times are tough. And we'd come up with this dreams list. The whole idea was to raise aspirations, show our kids, our community, that anything was possible. We had a daft run at Christmas #1. We ended up with a top 40. We were third favourites, third in the downloads. A battle bus, a plane flying around the area with a banner flick for Christmas #1. And then anyway, we got a golden buzzer, and we had no idea whatsoever. We took 50 kids, half of them on free school meals. Some with special needs, some that had been excluded in the past. It was a real eclectic mix of children. And the next thing you know, we get a golden buzzer, and 50 kids got a 6-night all expenses paid in a 5-star luxurious hotel in London. 50 of the parents. David Williams came to school in his helicopter, did an assembly. They all got a book. It was just the most unbelievable moment of my entire life, and I think we would all say that. But that one of the things that we've got in our uniform at the minute is hashtag Dare to Dream. And the whole idea is, don't ever tell our kids that they can't do something. You might not get where you want to in that dream or that ambition, but nobody ever regrets giving it a go. And that's what we encourage them to do, at least take that tiny step to making some special things happen. So yeah, that was a very special moment. I still watch that on the darker days where I'm a bit stressed. I'll go home and put the golden buzzer on and maybe shed another tear now and again.
Yeah, it's quite something. It's just so gloriously chaotic as a performance. That kid in the bin and like rolling across on little rollers, and it's absolutely amazing. Anyway, yes, I'd love to chat to you more about that sometime. But let's get into this far weightier and more serious conversation. And we're recording this for the benefit of listeners and viewers. We are recording this the day after Amanda Spielman, the chief inspector, did a really quite astonishing interview on Laura Kuenssberg's Sunday morning show, and I'm sure we'll get into that as well. But let's just rewind. I sort of invited you to do this conversation because I saw that you had been on the BBC recently, and that you were one of the first people, or perhaps the first of the several head teachers now who've spoken out about the impact that Ofsted has had and can have on your mental health and that of your colleagues. So, where does this begin for you? What makes sense as an entry point into this recent sort of? I mean, obviously, Ruth Perry was the reason that everybody started to have this conversation. Feelings are running high. When did this become something that you became very involved in?
I think I've been head teacher 12 years now, and I teaching another 10 or so before that. And I think what I've always, I have resented it. I was going to choose a more careful word, but I have resented the fact that when you're building up to Ofsted, which, they can come anywhere between 3, 4, 5 years. So if you're an outstanding school, it could be a lot longer than that. I've always resented the fact that you just build up and build up and build up, and it becomes more and more and more stressful. And an analogy that I drew on Twitter last week, I think, imagine you want this job, you really really want this job, and you've got an interview, and you've swatted up, you've done your research, you've spoke to colleagues, you've done everything that you possibly can. You think that you couldn't be any more prepared, but you don't know when the interview is going to be. And you're going to get a phone call between 10 and 12, and the interview will then be tomorrow. But the call might not come this week. And then when you get to Wednesday, it's not coming this week. So you wait the next week. But you can end up waiting weeks, months, even years. And I don't think that that's a great way to live. And then when you get the interview, you might have a team that hopefully there are lots of really good inspectors out there who do get you, who've sat in that chair, they've got the responsibility, and they get it. But equally, there are a proportion of inspectors out there who I think make the experience more difficult, more challenging, more stressful than it needs to be. So not only are you waiting for the phone call, but then the phrase that I hear all the time is, I just hope we don't get the wrong team. I hope we get somebody who gets us. So then you have your inspection, and hopefully they've all been, we've always got the outcome we wanted so far. And then you crash. There's kind of like a bit of a post-Ofsted slump because you can't maintain that level of adrenaline. And then, then things are okay, and then they build up progressively. And I think that's what's really difficult, that it just seems to come in cycles. And I watch what it does to colleagues, particularly when they maybe get the wrong outcome. Schools like ours in more disadvantaged areas, we're 4 times less likely to get an outstanding. We have got additional pressures on us, and I don't think the framework reflects that. So it's lots and lots of different things, but I guess I've always been aware. And then when Ruth Perry, the news came out, said that she'd committed suicide, I think it hit a raw nerve that you think, God, if I'd had a bad one, it could have gone wrong for me. I don't think I'd ever do that, but then nobody can ever say that. And I've sat with too many colleagues who've been in tears post-Ofsted, or even in tears waiting for it. And I just don't, we spend so much time in school on psychological safety and the culture and how we do things. I just don't think that it's fit for purpose these days. There's got to be a better, kinder, more productive and more constructive way of doing it.
Yeah, I completely see that. And it does, there are many aspects of this that are sort of cruel, aren't they? Like the way that it's set up does sort of seem cruel, especially the way in which you're not allowed to tell anybody the judgment afterwards. Seems just really unnecessary. And Ofsted have changed that, right? They published a statement recently, didn't they, where they said that we're going to make it so that they can. It's one of the few concessions that they've made since this whole thing blew up, that you can now speak to a few others in confidence, but you can't publicize the result.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that is I think the majority of people have always shared it with their staff. That has been my experience, and I think that's fair. And it's that agreement. You don't say anything, but. And to be honest, I think staff are very, every staff I've ever got, very, very good at doing that. But the idea that you're sat on, say you've had an inadequate, and it could be something that, a piece of paper that that you should have had in place, that you thought that you'd done, a misstep, something that could be put right pretty quickly. And the idea that I have to, go to bed on a night thinking, God, the world's going to know that I'm inadequate. That one word, you're teaching like Ruth's school, the teacher, I'm sure that everything else was good. The teaching, early years, all these things, but you go to bed thinking the world's going to be told that I'm inadequate in a couple of weeks' time. I just wouldn't sleep. I struggle at the best of times with my stress. I think any head teacher who's honest, most people do get quite stressed in the job because it's tough. I just think that is brutal to have to sit on that for a couple of weeks.
Completely. And even, I mean, that word, speaking of things that are cruel, because like adequate, it's not good to be called adequate even, is it? Like barely adequate is like just, an adequate human being. Like it's not a compliment. And to be to be not even adequate, to be like inadequate, it's just such a just a pejorative term. Like that obviously the head teacher is going to take personally, especially in the case as with Caversham, where it was leadership and management that was considered to be inadequate and everything else was good. And that just doesn't make sense, does it? You think, well, how can that be inadequate if everything else is good? How can inadequate leaders be leading a school that is good in all these other ways? That doesn't make sense. And so it doesn't make sense. But the word, and there was an interesting thing in the interview with Amanda Spielman yesterday where Laura Koonsberg asked her about the word, about the label, and how she said, why don't you just take away the label and give the parents a 4-page report? And she sort of did this weird thing in her answer where she said, well, there's two things there, and she mainly spoke about the first one, which was that we should that you're suggesting that we should just change that word inadequate to something else like unsatisfactory or whatever, or rubbish or just terrible or something. But nobody was suggesting that. Like the point, nobody's saying we should change the labels. People are saying we should get rid of the 4-point scale for a whole range of reasons. One of them being that it's completely methodologically, like it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. The idea that you can reliably distill something as complex as a school community on a 4-point scale, like it just doesn't.
You're right. I mean, you with the best will in the world, with the best training in the world, it's never going to be objective because it's humans. It's humans that are coming in, and we've all got our little pet peeves, the things that we'd like to be seen done a certain way. And with the best will in the world, you are never, ever going to make it objective. I think the other thing that I would say is that we are living in a different world. And maybe even 10 years ago, social media and things going viral wasn't as common. Whereas now that inadequate, which, yes, it might have been in the local paper and that might have hurt. But a week later, it was old news. Whereas now things can rumble on social media. It can be such a cruel, brutal place. And it's so public. So easy to share things these days, and I think part of it is we are living in a different world, and I'm not sure that the whole process reflects that now.
Yes, absolutely, and so it sounds like you've been dissatisfied. You used the word resent earlier, that you've resented the situation where you're sort of in this window of scrutiny. You don't know when it's going to land, so it's like out of your control. That's almost like the definition of stress. And so obviously the situation with Ruth Perry sort of brought everything to a head. And then you did an interview on the BBC, didn't you, where you were perhaps the first, or certainly one of the first head teachers to speak out, in public, as it were, with you not being anonymized, to talk about the impact that Ofsted can have on your mental health and that of your colleagues. Could you talk a little bit about that? What was it that prompted you to want to speak out there?
It started around the time that the news came out about Ruth Perry's suicide. I was cleaning out one of the tables in my bedroom, and I was cleaning out the tablets, if I'm totally honest. I've never really talked quite so openly about this, but I was cleaning out the drawer, and I suddenly realised that, over the last 10 years or whatever, there was, I tried different things, and then the penny dropped that I seem to end up, getting help for my sleep or for my anxiety when I'm in the Ofsted window, which sounds ridiculous. I can deal with most of what life throws at me, but then when you end up in that Ofsted window, that relentless day after day, that unknown, when's that phone call going to come? I've got everything in place, and I took a picture of it, and I thought at some point, if I'm feeling brave, ready to embrace a bit of my vulnerability. I'm going to put it out there because I'd noticed that I'd started having conversations with staff who maybe just weren't in a great place, like me struggling with their sleep, their anxiety. I do think mental health is much more of an issue recently. Same with parents, and I started being honest with them, like, have you been to the doctors? Have you tried this? Have you tried that? And they were always quite surprised when I opened up to them because on paper, I'm one of the most confident, lively, optimistic, positive, glass half full people you'll ever come across. And I am. I think I'm all those things, but equally, I'm a worrier. I fret about everything. It won't stop me taking chances and putting myself out there, but I worry a lot. And just around the time, Florida had not let Ofsted into a school. You had the roof paying. I just thought I'm going to put this on Twitter and just say basically, I don't, it doesn't feel right to me that I end up on medication every time I'm in the Ofsted window. And then I got a phone call off the BBC. Would you be willing to come in tomorrow to talk about mental health and Ofsted? And I thought about it. I had about half an hour, spoke to my deputy, one or two other people, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to do it because I haven't dared in the past. And I felt like I needed to empower myself. I needed to take a bit of control of what I could do and speak up that, I don't think it's okay what even now I'm trying to consider how I word things. It's not okay what Ofsted does to people. And it's not just me. I've had too many meetings with head teachers who are so stressed, really strong, resilient people who've ended up taking a bit of time off, ended up on medication, who've retired because they don't want to go through it again, who've quit because they haven't got it in them to go through another Ofsted. And these are good people. And a couple of months back, somebody said to me, even the good ones are leaving now. And I just thought, I can't do this. It's not okay. It does need to change. And I think for such a long time we've been afraid of it triggering an Ofsted, of riding people, upsetting that, the powers that be. And I just thought, do you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm not going to be all emotive about it. I'm not going to rant. I'm not going to get angry, but I just want to explain that he's Mr. Confident, Mr. Happy-go-lucky, who actually really struggles when we're in the Ofsted window. So yeah, that's how that came about.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. And since then, a number of other people have spoken out, haven't they?
Yeah. I mean, I literally got a couple of hundred messages of support and saying thank you for speaking up and just being honest. And even 2 or 3 weeks ago, I think there was even a reluctance to click like on a tweet or a post. It sounds daft, but you could feel that people didn't want to be associated with something that might have been overtly critical of the Ofsted process. And I think the seal is broken. If I'm totally honest, I think all of a sudden this, it's a bit like the emperor's new clothes. We all know that it needs to change. We all know that it needs to change. It could be so much better. And I think all of a sudden, Amanda Spielman made a statement last week. We had the BBC at the weekend, and I think there's a groundswell of opinion. I think it's going to be one of those things that will change. I just hope it's sooner rather than later, and we don't lose good people to retirement or changing jobs or, heaven forbid, doing something, more tragic suicides or anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's so much to pick up on there. There's something that I find a bit puzzling about all of this, and it's something that Amanda Spielman said yesterday. Like, she acknowledged that there's a culture of fear around inspections, and you just said I haven't dared to speak out in the past, and it's sort of we spoke a little bit off it before we started recording earlier that you don't want to feel like you're going to draw attention to yourself to trigger an inspection, that if you become outspoken, they might think, oh, we're going to teach this person a lesson. Who knows whether those kinds of conversations go on behind closed doors. Certainly there's a perception that certain high profile school leaders have felt like they've been targeted in the past. Let's just park that for now. The thing that I struggle with, and I don't know whether you might be able to help me to understand this a bit, is that on the one hand, there's this culture of fear around Ofsted, and a sense that it's not fair, that it's not objective. And then on the other hand, you've got this thing that Ofsted keep mentioning, and I think that Amanda Spielman mentioned it again yesterday, that head teachers who've just been through an Ofsted inspection are often given this survey, and they often report really quite high levels of satisfaction with the process. And I'm trying to square that circle for the benefit of listeners. Dave is grinning. I imagine that you have an answer to this question. And I've got some inklings. I've read a few things, but what's going on here? What's like? Help me and our listeners,
James,
to
it's
understand
mad.
this.
It's mad when you've been through Ofsted, and you can have relatively positive experiences. I'm yet to go through one where you think, "Oh, I wouldn't have said that. I wouldn't have done that. That's a bit unnecessary. Come on, give us the benefit of the doubt." However, you've been through the process. You're just glad that you've survived. You're just glad. You know that the overwhelming, I'm led to believe that the overwhelming majority of complaints are not upheld. You're just glad to have got through it. You've got through it. Leave me alone. We move on. And the idea that my understanding, and I can't remember, so I'm not going to pretend that I do, but I have a feeling that some critics out there have criticised it because it's worded in such a way to kind of reaffirm, what they want to hear, which is that it was okay. But the reality is, you're just happy to get through it. It's funny because I knew you were going to say that. I was smiling. I think we've just not felt empowered to speak up. We've just not felt empowered to speak up. We are literally terrified, I think, of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, not having the piece of paper. And when you're really proud of the job that you do, you think that you're good at your job, the kids get a good experience, the community is happy with what you're doing. We shouldn't have to live in fear of the wrong person coming in and making a judgment that you feel you've got to walk away from the job that you love, leave the school that you love. And I'm not going anywhere, but that's how I feel. That's how most of our colleagues feel. None of us know how it will feel to go from good to requires improvement, or even worse to inadequate. I don't know how I would cope with that. That can't do anything for your mental health and your ego and everything else.
I've been I was in a
biased.
school that was put into special measures once. And it was brutal. It was absolutely brutal. And it felt so unfair as well, because the school was under new leadership, and it was clear that the corner had been turned, but we hadn't had a set of exam results yet. And they came in May or June or something, just before the exam results came out. And the senior leaders were saying, just give us time, just give us another few months and you'll see that things are better. And they were like, well, it's not there on paper now, and so measures it is for you. And that has such a detrimental impact on the community, on recruitment, on funding, therefore, because the school is paid per pupil. Nobody puts special measures, or very few people put the special measures school down as a first choice. It affects house prices in the area. The consequences of these very subjective judgments are really far-reaching. And yeah, I know exactly. I totally understand what you mean about the terror, the impact that it could have on you. There's a bit of a sort of a sense that head teachers, there's a bit of like football manager syndrome, isn't there? If you have one bad season, then you're out on your ear, and your ability to provide for your family is on the line. It's unbelievably high stakes, stressful situation to find yourself in, isn't it? And you said earlier that it could be so much better. So I wonder if we could move into thinking about just like the details of like what would you keep out of the current inspection framework, and what would you get rid of, and what would you bring in its place? How would you like things to change?
I've thought about that, and I'm even going to pull up. I even made notes, which I'm not one to write stuff down. I'd rather talk to people and throw it out. But I came up with a few different things. I think one, safeguarding needs to be done more regularly, and I would almost make that separate. It's crazy that you could be an outstanding school and you've not been through Ofsted for 12 years, 15 years, I think I've heard of.
17. I think the longest was 17 that I've seen.
Yeah, it's a long time. I think I do think it should be people who've absolutely been head teachers, and that's no disrespect to deputies, assistants, or anything like that. But I've been deputy head twice. I had a stint of acting headship for 2 terms, and I thought that I knew what it would be like. It'd be an easy step from acting head to full substantive head. And the reality is nothing could prepare you for that ultimate responsibility and all the stresses and pressures that come with having the ultimate accountability. I think I understand. I remember back in the day, you might have a couple of weeks or even a couple of months. I can't remember exactly what it was, preparing for an Ofsted. You get quite a lot of notice, but I don't like the 1 day's notice. You might have some really serious meetings, that you can't really rearrange, or things that need to go ahead. And the idea that I had some really serious meetings last week, and actually said, like, can you imagine, heaven forbid, we had the call during that time? It just wouldn't really have worked. I'd have been so stressed anyway to then go into that call. So I would do that. I think having the opportunity to put things right, particularly with safeguarding. I did read, I don't know if there's CQC, there's something out there that if you, it's independent skills, I think the ring up, get a lot of information about safeguarding in advance. And if there's something you could put right quite quickly, you're given the opportunity to do that, which I think, depending on what it was, would be fair. I don't really like the word judgment, because nobody really likes being judged. I almost want to change the inspectors' names to coaches or advisors, or something that feels a little bit more done with rather than to. And I think at the weekend, Amanda Spielman's, almost suggested that it's not their job to work alongside skills and improve. So I don't know, do you remember that bit?
Yeah.
There was almost like that's not their role. They're there just to judge whether things are going all right. I've got a long list. I mean, you might shut me up at some point.
No, keep going. It's good.
More localized
I'm
approach.
making notes, so I'll pick you up on some in a minute.
More localized approach. We've got a brilliant advisor who knows the school well. Can there be a system in place for checking the work that they do? Almost early warning systems. The grades need to go. I appreciate that. There needs to be some way of identifying skills that do need extra support. I think in agreement with the profession, with teachers, with unions in terms of what should be in this framework. Removal of the embargo in terms of talking about, we've already touched on that one. I think an independent reviewer for claims, a bit like the IPCC, who, if there's a complaint about police, they go to this independent body. It does feel a little bit like Ofsted mark their own homework. Feedback sort of from staff about the experience of the inspector. It's really interesting that feedback on us is very public, and very black and white. It would be interesting. I would imagine there'd be lots of inspectors out there that would be very uncomfortable with open feedback. Almost like you could have a rate my inspector, and you choose who you buy into. So it becomes a little bit market led. That the good ones get more work and they work alongside skills, and the ones that unfortunately don't. The school doesn't have a good experience with them. So I think there's that separate framework for primary and secondary, and an appreciation that the challenges of skills in deprived areas and small schools, they do have different challenges. I think most people would agree on that. And making it more open and transparent for deferrals. I've had quite a few messages sent to me about when deferrals weren't accepted, when I think that they probably should have done. So those are some starters. I must be pretty serious if I've made a list about them. I don't do lists like that kind of thing.
That's amazing. I've got 14 things on that list. Yeah, absolutely. I love the idea of rate my inspector, because that feedback, that survey that they keep citing and saying, oh, but look, everybody's really positive about their experience, is not anonymous. It's like straight after your inspection, so they know that you're saying. And I think that some people might be concerned that if they're very critical of the chief inspector, say, before the report has been finalized, that they might go away and add a few more comments in, or potentially even change the grade. But to have anonymized feedback, a way to capture people's honest and robust views without fear of repercussion, you would collect a very, very different set of data.
And I think staff as well, not just the head teacher, because the reality is 12 years in, I'm used to difficult conversations. I'm okay with people being very frank with me. I'd rather they were, to be totally honest. I can deal with that. But for some staff who maybe aren't used to, to really difficult conversations, I think they deserve a different approach. And it'll be interesting that, I could imagine overnight, a lot of inspectors would balk at the idea and they wouldn't want to do the job anymore. Yet that's what they come and do to us. And there's an irony that doesn't escape me there.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned earlier, the way that they collect that data, that needs to be designed by social research scientists.
Yeah,
because, like you said, the way that some of those feedback statements are worded, like some of them say, like, the inspection process was fair, for example, and it's like tick, whatever, like agree or disagree. But there's a thing in surveys, a thing called acquiescence bias, where like whatever statement you put in front of people, they tend to agree with it. So if you ask people like recycling is important, most people will go, oh yeah, recycling is important. And if you then say recycling is basically a waste of time, like most of it ends up in a landfill, most people agree with that as well. And so you have to word some of the statements negatively, and there are ways that you can balance out that acquiescence bias by having positively and negatively worded statements and what have you. There's loads of things you can do to make it better, but for sure, like the data that we have on Ofsted is flaky, to say the least. Let's go back to the first thing that you mentioned there about safeguarding. You were saying that, I mean, like, first of all, it's ridiculous, isn't it, that if Ofsted thinks that safeguarding is so important that that they can say and tell an otherwise good or outstanding school that they're inadequate, but they don't, so then they don't see fit to inspect some schools. I think it'd been 13 years at Caversham since they'd had a full inspection. If safeguarding is so important, like, you need to check it a bit more often.
It's madness,
surely.
Isn't it?
Yeah,
there's certain things that all of a sudden the pennies drop. That's mad. That's literally ludicrous. If that's the most important thing of it. But you could have a school that, they've not been doing DBS checks, that they've not been recruiting properly. And that is really serious. I get that, absolutely. But don't leave it 15 years till you go back. I mean, it's crazy. And I think that's what happened at the weekend. We can both see each other, we're laughing. But it's the lunacy of all of it. All of a sudden, and I think what has changed is that we're living in a different world. Attendance is more challenging, behaviour is more difficult to manage. You can't get the access to the services. We are living in such a different world. Let's respect that. Let's appreciate that, and bring out some of the changes that we really need to.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's something about the way in which Ofsted defines safeguarding. Like, there was some instance, like yesterday, one thing that was interesting was that she asked her, I think the first question was, do you have confidence in the report at Caversham? And she didn't say, like, yes, there's been an investigation and we've really looked into it. She just sort of said, based on what I've seen, I don't have any reason to doubt it. But that sounds really subjective. Like, have you actually systematically looked at this and interviewed the people involved and talked to? And then it turned out that Ofsted hadn't even reached out to Ruth Perry's family. I don't know whether they'd reached out to the school. And there was that horrendous, they changed it, didn't they? But did you see that bullet point in the report where it sort of said, it was like information about the school, and there was 4 bullet points, and one of them said there's a new head teacher because the last one died, and then the next bullet point said there's a breakfast club in the morning. It was just like, come on, like, that's just so.
See, I actually, it didn't rest easy at all. I felt really sad watching that, because I'm thinking, if we'd been through something like that, the first thing that I would have done is I'd have gone to see the family, to check in, to listen to the feedback. There absolutely would have been an investigation of the process, what was involved in it, was it fair, and the fact that those things, my understanding is that they haven't gone ahead. I mean, the other thing I read at the weekend, and I need to fact check this one, but I'm sure didn't they do an Ofsted trial at Caversham, and didn't Amanda Spielman actually go there? And it was commented on that, everything was really, really good. I'm sure that I read that the weekend. It's too weird to make that one up.
I thought, I heard that there'd been I saw something in a report that there'd been some sort of a monitoring visit or something 2 or 3 years ago, and everything was fine. I didn't know that Amanda had been there herself.
I could be wrong, and forgive me if I'm wrong. I'm saying I'm not sure, but I thought I'd read that. I mean, there's so much out there to read about at the moment, but you could just feel it on social media over the weekend that they're just not grasping the fact that we need something different now. It's not it's not that we want it, we need it.
Yeah, and there were also reports. I think that this came from her sister, and so again, they can't verify all of this, but she said that there was a couple of things, like, for example, the inspectors had seen a kid flossing, doing that dance in the playground, and they'd perceived that as like sexualized behavior. That there'd been a minor scuffle, like with two kids in the playground, which happens from time to time when kids are in playgrounds and it's dealt with, but that was considered to be like child on child abuse or something. And I've heard other examples of like very sort of fairly minor or fairly
the flossing is one. The flossing is one, isn't it? I'm sure the flossing that's a definite. I'm sure that's what I read as well. And I'm shaking my head here because I'm thinking, I've had me and the kids doing that in the front of assembly.
Yeah,
I think I've done live Facebook videos with that's not inappropriate. That's just a dance.
Yeah.
And that off TikTok or Fortnite or whatever it was online. It's just.
It says a lot more
cool,
about the inspector than it does about the school, for sure. But just more generally about the way in which safeguarding is conceived. Like, what's your feeling on that? Is there any changes that you'd make there?
I don't think so. It feels very serious, but then rightly so. You got your single central record. You got to have your policies up to date. Plans. Of actions that you're going to take and so on. I'm thinking through it. I'm trying to think of something that stands out. I would actually just do it more regularly. None of us have a problem with accountability. No, nobody. I've not heard anybody say they've got any problem with accountability. But let's make it fair. Let's make it human, kind, considerate, a supportive experience. No, I can't. I mean, I don't know if anybody else has said about safeguarding, but there isn't anything that jumps out at me. I think, if anything, just give us an opportunity to put it right. That's the important thing, isn't it?
Yeah, people are talking about like an MOT, right? So that you fail your MOT, but then you get to go and get 24 hours to get your tires replaced or whatever, and then you get your pass certificate, rather than being on the naughty step for the next 18 months and all the consequences that has. Okay, thank you. That's interesting. Let me just have a quick down the list of things that you just talked about. The independent reviewer, I think, is a really important one. That it does feel like the complaints procedure is like very few complaints are upheld or taken seriously. And the idea of deferrals. So just to be clear, that's when somebody says, actually, do you know what? Like, there's the head teacher's away, or there's something happening in the school calendar, and this isn't a good time to do this. And it just goes ahead anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I feel quite strong in that one. I remember going on a residential with the kids a couple of months back, and we were about 3 hours away. And I only went for the second half of the week, knowing that by the time I left school, I knew the call wasn't coming that week. So my deputy went for the first half, because you can't plan anything, because you just worry that you're going to be in the wrong part of the country when you get that call. And it's no way to live. I understand the no notice, that you can't just game the system. They will get a realistic view of the school, but it just means that you might have something. You might have a whole school trip to the theatre at Christmas for a pantomime or something. There are certain times that it just doesn't make sense not for them to come in at that point in time. I mean, the other thing I'd probably add in is that certain points of the year, i.e. just before you're breaking up, just before Christmas, there are certain points in a primary school. It just seems madness. Give us a chance, guys. Christmas in primary school, it's always going to be a bit lively.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so there's another question or another idea that I've been talking with people about recently. Like, one of the things with Ofsted is that it's quite a broad remit, isn't it? They're looking at all kinds of things: personal development, behavior, curriculums, huge assessment, what have you, safeguarding. And given that, they're only able to get around to see schools on average once every 4 or 5 years. If you were talking about doing a safeguarding visit annually, which lots of people are now, they would surely have to slim down lots of the other stuff that they're currently talking about. And one of the ideas that I've that I've been kicking around with some people is this idea of having like a local arrangement where you would be partnered with another school locally, and that could be administered by the DFE, right? And they tell you that you two are partnering with each other. And I've done this thing called research informed peer review, RIPPER, where two teams of people, and it's like a cross-sectional team from each school. So you would take the head teacher, a senior leader, a middle leader, a classroom teacher, an early career teacher, maybe a parent, a kid, a governor, to a different school, and you do reciprocal visits. And it's often we would often focus them around feedback, because that was just the topic of that project, but it could focus on behavior or curriculum or any of those other things. And you go and observe some lessons, and you do all of the stuff that Ofsted do. You interview kids, you interview parents, you do some sort of a survey, and there would be a reciprocal visit with this other local school, and you'd learn so much out of that process, I think. And it would be like based around, it would be strengths based. It'd be like, what's happening here that's really good, and what can we learn from, and what might you do next, sort of thing. And so one idea would be to have these we were talking about them as like collective responsibility networks. And so each year, like let's say there's 3 terms, one term there'd be a safeguarding visit from whatever, some rebranded Ofsted might be. And then the other 2 terms, there'd be a visit to a local school, and likewise a reciprocal visit to your school. What do you think about that as an idea, and what might be the arguments against it?
I've literally just added it to my list. I think I've just, you can probably see me type, I wasn't emailing. I absolutely love it. It's funny because that one of the things I had thought about, I think they call it somewhere in the country, I'm sure like you have a challenge partner. And that's exciting. Can you imagine it, not necessarily let's change it from an inspection process to an accountability process. I like that. I'm writing that one down as well. And imagine that you could do with that. It's something that you work together with another school. You build that relationship up. You're able to build it up together. You almost then can have the model that you have with, say, Key Stage 1 or Key Stage 2 or reception. You might get a monitoring visit. Every couple of years, you might get a monitoring visit to look at the work that you're doing, to check on the accountability. I get excited about that idea. We're okay with it. We've already got SATs. That's a whole different conversation. But we've got all these assessments that already go on. Let's do it in such a way that brings about real positive and lasting change. Wouldn't that, that would be brilliant. We'd all sign up for that, I'm sure. Because
that's it. It would be based, I think, by Ofsted's own admission, like they aren't in the business of improving schools. They're in the business of sort of making out like they can just drop into schools and evaluate reliably where that school is at. And I think that just like from a social research perspective, like you can't really reliably do that. Like you said, what was it? If you're in a disadvantaged school, you're 4 times less likely to get an outstanding judgment. So what are they looking at when they're in those lessons? Like if essentially their judgment is totally biased by socioeconomic status of the community that school serves, that seems to be what that is based on. Or is it just that or is it just a coincidence that the teachers who happen to work in disadvantaged schools are less outstanding? Like that just seems ridiculous, doesn't it? It seems like the methods that they use are not reliable.
It's just nonsense. And when you look at say that some of the more disadvantaged communities that I've served, life's tough out there. You've got families who can't afford the bills, who've got all sorts of things going on in their life, that the housing's not in the condition that you would like to. They're struggling for employment. That we need to be supporting these communities. Life is pretty tough for them. It's not the same as some of you during lockdown, a middle class family in a leafy lane with a big garden and brilliant Wi-Fi connections and devices each. And it's not a level playing field. We can't use the same framework for everybody. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, completely. And that was the other thing that you said, which I loved, a more localized approach, like having a local advisor who knows the school, who has a relationship with the school. It just seems like it would be much richer the understanding, and we could do away with the idea that you have to compare everybody on a level playing field, because schools are so varied. You're not comparing like with like, and so comparing them all on the same 4-point scale, that doesn't mean that you're being even-handed and fair. It just means that you are applying an ill-fitting tool to a very large, diverse population of schools and people, and therefore your methods are whack, as the kids might say. Yeah, absolutely. And so, what was I going to say then? There was something else. Just about Flake Fleet. So are you in a window at the moment? Where are you?
We'll be 5 years in July, and I think what stresses me out is, do you know what? It's brilliant here. It's brilliant. It is. I'm sorry. I'm really proud of it. Our staff are brilliant. The kids are brilliant. The community's brilliant. I'm dead proud of it. I think I do a really good job. I think our staff doing an amazing job. Our community is on board. The families are supportive. We're doing lots of exciting things. The building's in great nick. The behaviour is brilliant. I don't think we should have to worry about the next Ofsted, but we do, because we serve a disadvantaged community. Times have been really tough over the last couple of years, and I really resent the fact that if we get the wrong team with the wrong agenda, this could all go wrong, and that's not fair. There should be no element of chance or luck to an inspection process. You devote your life to this when you're every level within school in a way you devote to. But as a head teacher, you do devote your life to your school, to your children. You're getting emails all the time, phone calls. It does take over your life, and you put everything into it. And for it to be undone and it to make you feel absolutely rubbish on a 2-day process that maybe comes out with the wrong verdict. And I'm sure most of the time they get the right one, but it's the fear of the unknown, isn't it? It's the fear of where this might go wrong. And I really care deeply about my colleagues here. I care deeply about them further afield, and I just see what it does to them. I've got an inbox full of hundreds of messages saying exactly the same as me, and I think people are starting to speak up and say, look, what it does to us. It isn't conducive to running our schools. It's not conducive for our children. It's not conducive for our partners at home, our families, and look at what happened with Ruth Perry. And the sad reality is, I feel quite strongly that this will happen again unless something changes, and it is going to change. So why not change it now rather than later? And it's one of the few things that's not going to cost us billions of pounds. We know we have mental health issues, and getting them in specialist provision and so on, that will cost a huge amount of money. Reform an Ofsted won't, and it could be done pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, finally, if I may, just as a last question, you often hear from school leaders and head teachers that being in an Ofsted window constrains what you do. Like people often say, "Oh, there's this really good project that I really want to get off the ground, but we're in an Ofsted window, and we just sort of need to play it safe until the crosshairs have moved on to some other school, and then we can do what we really think needs to happen." Is that something that you recognise also?
Yeah. I think the reason that comes about is you'll be doing what you consider to be the things that matter. Improving teaching, the experience of the children, supporting families, all of that. You're conscious that the small amount of time for the non-essential, not the non-essential, not non-urgent. I'm trying to think of the best way to put it. You've got a bit of extra brain capacity. That when you've got that little bit of extra brain capacity, it goes on the things that genuinely make a difference, the exciting things, the innovative things, the creative stuff. And I think when you're in the window, you're forever thinking, get that piece of paper checked, make sure that action plan's in place. Long-term stress, it trashes the body, doesn't it? We can prove the impact on the body with cortisol and sleep and all those other things that other more cleverer people know about, more about than me. It is like that, and I've tried. I guess what I get a kick out of is when Coronation Day, we've got a circus coming, a big top on the field, and I've got a farm coming, and I get a real kick out of that, and I look forward to coming to school, and the kids will look forward to coming to school, and I think that's where I do have to be stronger and commit to doing those kind of things, even when I am very, very stressed. It's just not as easy to do it.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, thank you, Dave, for taking the time to speak with me today, and thank you also for speaking out in the way that you did. It was a very courageous thing to do. It must have been a difficult thing to do, to put your vulnerability out there for people to see. But I think it's really important what you did there, and it has opened the floodgates further. I know that a number of other people have come forward and shared the impact that it can have on their mental health and their sleep and what have you, in their family life. And that's the story here, isn't it? It's like, this is not an isolated incident. I think that seems to be what Ofsted are suggesting. They're like, it's really tragic about what happened with Ruth Perry, but let's just wait and see what the coroner report says. Suicide's never a one-dimensional thing. And essentially, I think that they were suggesting that, although they haven't said it, in explicit words, but the fact that they're not talking about reforming or changing anything suggests that there's nothing to see here. And actually, the real story is that there are many, many people out there in these 20,000 schools in England that feel very similarly to you. And up until this point, people have been too afraid to speak out about it. And it doesn't seem like this is going away anytime soon, does it?
No, absolutely. I think you've summed that up really nice. It's just sad that we've got to this point. I honestly, I love my job. It's not the easiest at the best of times, but I do love it, and I just hope that the stress that I'm feeling, colleagues are feeling, that we can do something about it and focus on the things that matter within school, which is the children.
Yeah, and the prize here is, like the way that your face became really animated when you were talking about, imagine if that those 14 or 15 points that we came up with today, if that was just adopted and enacted from September, we would have an amazing situation on our hands where we could celebrate all of the diversity and the strengths within our system. We can still be accountable in a better way, right? Instead of in a fear-based way, in a supportive way, in a more constant way, in a richer way, where we had more understanding of what's happening in our schools. It seems like there's loads of things that could be won out of this horrendous tragedy and this period of the painful reflection that we're going through. There's lots of prizes on the table if we can figure out how to make that happen.
Absolutely, no, I totally agree. So I've quite enjoyed tuning it over, really. Just hope things change, James. I just hope things change.
Well, let's just make it happen instead of just hoping. That's what we should
do.
Leave
it with us.
Thanks so much, Dave.
No worries. Thanks for having me, James.